All right. Welcome everybody to our wildfire event and film tonight. We'll be showing a movie called The West is Burning, followed by a panel discussion. The movie's approximately 1 hour and focuses really on some challenges that land managers and regions are facing as it pertains to wildfire in the Western United States. You'll notice there's a lot of talk about California and Oregon and a little bit of Washington, I think. And I would invite you to just watch that, but be thinking about some of the challenges that we face here in the Wasatch. The forest conditions and types are a little bit different there. So the challenges that they have there and that we're experiencing here are a little bit different. And I think our challenges and our solutions, of course, are going to be different as well. I'm very excited, and I think we're very lucky to have 4 incredibly knowledgeable public servants from the Forest Service, from the state forestry, the state of Utah's Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and then also Salt Lake City Public Utilities. And I'll make introductions to those folks after we watch the film. So maybe for right now, just make sure you remain muted with your video off, and we'll start the film. The West is Burning. So thanks for being here, and look forward to catching up with everybody a little bit later. One more thing is that it is kind of the chat function will be available during the movie. So if you want to enable that chat box and kind of keep it in the corner, you're welcome to provide some commentary and things like that in the chat function while the film is going. So without any more from me, let's get into the film, The West is Burning, and we'll see you guys at about 7 p.m.
My neighbor knocked on my door very aggressively and said, "Shirley, get out here." And I said, "What's going on, Karen?" And she said, "Santa Rosa is burning down." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We got into the helicopter, and the winds were blowing 40 to 50 miles an hour. There was smoke and fire everywhere. All I could do was look and say to Mike Thompson, our congressman who had been in Vietnam, "It looks like a war went on down there. It looks like a bomb." And he kept turning to me and saying, "Yeah, that's what it looks like, but it's actually worse." Hard to talk about still. Those first few days were so hard. We didn't sleep much. We worked all the time.
The night of October 8th, we had a windstorm, and that windstorm led to 17 different fire starts across this landscape all around Santa Rosa. Those 17 fires sort of rushed into each other and became 2 main large fire events. Stoplights were out, the power was out, people did not know which direction to go. It was really chaotic.
There are close to about 20 fires that are scorching hundreds of thousands.
Thousands of firefighters have been unable to
across
contain
8 counties,
wildfire.
and hundreds more people are missing.
He had traveled 16 miles in an instant, it seemed like. It just came roaring over the hills.
I've seen a lot of forest fires, but I had never seen anything like this before. It was otherworldly.
The wildfire issue has become intense in the United States, and it's gotten so much worse over the last 10 and 15 years, it's startling.
We've had years and years of drought here in California, and there's no doubt it's gotten hotter and windier, and those conditions are ripe for wildfires, which now turn into urban fires, it turns out.
There are more people in harm's way, and the harm is getting worse. So I think people are starting to realize that we have a crisis on our hands.
I think it could very likely happen again here. That's part of the sadness of all of this, is that we all want to rebuild and recover, and yet we still live with these tremendous risks.
These wildfires are increasingly becoming an urban phenomenon. I mean, this, to me, you couldn't illustrate it more than this. We're not up in the hills, we're in downtown Santa Rosa. The fire blew into Santa Rosa in the early morning hours. I think it was about 4 a.m. I know people in this neighborhood who got the warning, looked out, saw a wall of flame, got in their car, escaped, and 4 minutes later, their house was on fire. So that's how rapidly the fire moved through here. We've increasingly encroached our communities into these landscapes where we have removed fire and grazing from a lot of the landscape. And so the shrub layer has built up, the grasses have built up, and now when fire does come, it's a conflagration. We've been suppressing fire here for so long that you could live here for an entire generation and have never seen an event like happened last year. So it's in that beginning stages of a learning curve culturally here. My biggest struggle is helping people understand that landscapes have always been actively managed by Indigenous people, and that we have a need to steward our parks and open spaces, and that will make them safer, and it will also restore habitats both for wildlife and for our forests. We need to be burning, we need to be thinning, and that's a big lift. A lot of people have deep skepticism about that. Fire is only one tool in the box, right? So one thing we're doing is trying to ramp up our sheep and goat grazing program, really get those critters out there, browsing down the shrub layer. The second tool is mechanical treatment, so going in there and hand cutting. But by far, the cheapest tool in the box is prescribed fire. So to the degree to which we as land managers can get the public comfortable with prescribed fire, we'll be able to do a lot more acres for a lot fewer dollars. And that's kind of the goal.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
All right, this is my daughter, Kira.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Come on in.
This is beautiful. Thank you so much.
And Marty Roberts.
Good to meet you. My goal tonight is to make sure that if you have any questions or you feel like you're going to get tough questions, I can help you answer them, right? So basically the ballot measure is roughly carved into 3 buckets: safety, access, and then the third is my favorite, because natural resources, so protecting the environment. And for everyone in this room, what I want you to understand is that this is a game changer for us. If we get this ballot measure, this little thing that I stood up called the Natural Resource Division at Sonoma County Regional Parks, which is mighty but small, will really be real. I mean, we will have the funds to do a lot of what I do is looking at these landscapes and trying to figure out how do we restore the natural process. Let's make sure that we get prescribed fire back in our toolbox in this part of the world, which is my goal, because that actually draws down the fuel loads and helps protect our neighboring towns and communities.
By the time I was 8 years old, I discovered that, in fact, there was a profession called forestry, and they paid people to actually go out and spend time in the woods. And I decided right then that's what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to work for the Forest Service. The mindset of the forester in mid-20th century was very much that forests were a collection of trees that you managed to produce wood. In the post-World War II era, there was tremendous pressure on the Forest Service to increase the timber harvest on federal lands in order to provide the wood that was needed to build all the homes for the veterans who were coming back and starting their lives over again. The agency sort of went over to the dark side, and through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the timber harvest just continued to go up. Yeah, I'm a history buff, and certainly World War II history, because I was a kid growing up right in the middle of it. So up until the 70s and 80s, science had all been oriented towards how do we manage forest lands to produce trees as a crop. And nobody had done any significant research at all on what was the nature of these forest ecosystems. So all of the pre-World War II period was devoted very much to creating a Forest Service that could detect and suppress fire. The real mistake was made, which was to assume all fire was bad and all fire should be put out. It was particularly effective in areas that had historically had a lot of fire, frequent fire. They had very low levels of accumulation of fuels. They had forest structures that were very resistant to fire. But in order to maintain those kinds of conditions, fire needed to be allowed to continue. And we didn't allow that. The fuels began to accumulate. The structure of the forest changed. Fuel-filled forests would now be consumed by the fire. Historically, in these fire-frequent landscapes, the fires were often very large, but they weren't intense. Our problem today is that we have large, intense fires. In the Intermountain West and the Sierra Nevada, we're talking about millions of acres that need treatment. Now, at the same time, there were other forests, like our Douglas fir hemlock forest on the west side of the Cascades, that the fire suppression policy didn't change their fundamental nature. These were forests that didn't burn frequently. These are the really classic forests of the coastal Pacific Northwest. Very high productivity, lots of down wood. And of course, all of this organic material represents fuels. they have a very different kind of relationship with fire than the forests that are in the dry part of the country, the frequent fire forests. The appropriate strategy for a forest like this is to, in fact, be very aggressive about detecting and suppressing fires so that fire doesn't get into this sort of a forest. And the neat thing about that is suppressing fire in this forest isn't going to make it unnatural. These forests are used to going for hundreds of years without fire. This one is doing things on a scale that defy our ability to modify greatly. We need to understand and respect these environments.
I was born in Oregon, studied forestry at Berkeley, and then I was planning on a career working for the Forest Service as a silviculturist. And unfortunately, the year that I graduated was a year that the bottom fell out of the timber market, and feel very fortunate that I landed my current job with the Wilderness Society. And that was 26 and a half years ago. So. There was an erosion of trust in the agency's commitment to non-timber resources. Policies of the Forest Service rewarded timber management above all other resources on the national forest. And through the 60s and 70s was leading to the intentional elimination of old growth, which was considered to be slow growing and not an ideal resource for forestry. And foresters had been so successful at that there was very little old growth left. Wow. You just don't see this kind of board anymore. This is a coast redwood board cut from a single tree in 1940. How about this place hasn't changed in 50 years? Amazing.
My name's Susan Jane Brown, and I'm a staff attorney and Wildlands Program Director for the Western Environmental Law Center. I got involved in forest environmental issues when I came to Oregon in 1997 to attend Lewis and Clark Law School and wanted to practice environmental law. I had never seen old growth forests before. You hear people talk about how there are these cathedral forests, and it definitely feels that way. It's good to be humbled by a place like that. Particularly here in the Northwest, there's a lot of old growth logging. Depending on who you talk to, between 2 and 5% of those native forests are still left. They need all the help that we can give them. I felt that that was really my calling. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to protect those places. Certainly legal work is really challenging because at the end of the day, somebody wins and somebody loses. And if you don't win, you know, the implication is that a special place is lost. Back in the 70s and 80s, we were harvesting billions of board feet every year off of the forests in Oregon and Washington alone. You can only do that for so long before the ecosystem starts to give out. And that's exactly what started to happen. It wasn't sustainable.
Once the scientists started detecting changes in wildlife populations, including the spotted owl, people kind of put 2 and 2 together and realized that the disappearance of old growth forests was leading to the potential extinction of species, and that drove environmentalists to act.
The trust that the agency lost, the public trust, was substantial, and they're still trying to come back from that. So when the agency says, oh, just trust us, don't worry, it's like, no, I don't trust you. I remember logging without laws. No.
just like the Amazon. You know, once you cut it down to a level, it's gone.
I spent 18 years in the sawmill business, and they're toying with my life.
Over time, as we learn more about these forests, and as Congress learned more about these forests, the tide turned. Too much was being lost in this very aggressive pursuit of converting the national forest to timber farms.
Bill Clinton directed that a team be assembled to facilitate an economic transition away from large amounts of old growth logging toward a community economy that could be sustained at a lower level of logging. And then that became the Northwest Forest Plan, which designated a series of large, protected, mostly old growth areas across the Cascade Mountain Range and west in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. And that sort of set off dominoes across the national forest system. Harvest on the national forests fell by an order of magnitude in just a few years.
Well, we come here in 1945. And then in 65, I quit the Forest Service, partnered with my folks, and run the store. We had anywhere from 2 to 3 hired help that was on the floor with us at most times. And we run from about 7 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. When we locked the store down, this was the liquor store. And over here, in this section, we wrote game licenses. And I do miss the people that you used to do, because there was all kind of people. They were nice people, and they were interesting and whatever else. But the rigmarole you had to put up with the government, I don't miss that. They marked off that timber up there as old growth timber. Can't log it, you can't do anything with it, and it's old growth. When the sawmills quit out and the logging quit, then I couldn't make enough money to pay hired help. So that lost a lot of population. Then they shut the Forest Service down. That lost some more population. And so we're down to probably, I don't know, 60, 80 people. I don't know what the logic is, but basically it's government logic.
Hi, Brenda. Hi, Brooke. How's clerking going?
It's going well.
My name is Mark Webb. I'm currently Executive Director for Blue Mountains Forest Partners. Before that, I was Grant County Judge for 1 term, 6 years. I do remember one time, Commissioner Britton and I were at a meeting with State Fire Marshal and some other folks out of Monument, and I was new to office then, and State Fire Marshal had misled me on something, and I went over the desk to get him. And Commissioner Britton pulled me down. So that's probably what I remember most. I was ready for something. Before collaborative involvement, the environmental community really didn't appreciate what we were trying to do in Grant County, or our respect from the landscape, and there was a lot of animosity or distrust.
Well, I was skeptical that there was compromise possible. I started doing East Side timber sale work when I was still in law school.
As long as I could remember, there had been at least 3 mills going here, Prairie Wood Products, Grant Western, and Malheur Lumber. Both Grant Western and Malheur Lumber were big log mills, so they took old growth.
I'd done a bunch of litigation. We'd shut down the Malheur's timber program, so there really just wasn't anything happening. And that worked fine for me.
When you shut down an industry, and it's about the only industry that provides a livelihood here, you're pretty upset and it's hard to talk.
It was an interesting time. It was very challenging. My first trip to Grant County, I brought somebody with me because I wasn't sure that my safety was assured.
I didn't meet Susan Jane until a former county commissioner that I served with, Boyd Britton, had a federal lawsuit, And as Boyd would do, he wanted to know who was shutting us down. Somebody pointed him to Susan Jane, and he went over and asked if we couldn't do things differently, essentially, and invited her out.
I met Mark Webb for the first time in 2004, maybe. Well, I know what Mark thought of me. Mark thought I had horns and a tail. Is what Mark thought. You know, I was a lawyer and I'm a liberal female from Portland coming into his community to tell him what to do. You know, the impetus for being out there was a bad fire season in 2002. We had a lot of big fires in Oregon. Those sorts of occurrences were becoming more and more common. Whereas every, decade or so, you'd have a bad fire year. It was now every 4 or 5 years, and then it was every 2 or 3 years. And now it's pretty much every year.
That the only reason industry and the environmental community came together at all is because neither had an option anymore. SJ and others had essentially shut down the logging industry, and they were desperate for wood, and they were willing to take anything they could get as long as they got some more wood. Fortunately for us, the environmental community was also coming to appreciate that while they might have saved the old growth trees from the timber industry, they were beginning to lose them increasingly to catastrophic wildfires, fires that would have been unnatural in the landscape in the past. And so they were confronted with the challenge of having to address that through active management, which they've been spending a lot of time shutting down.
This problem is not abstract. There are a few places where people have taken aggressive action to reduce the fuels around their homes and around communities, and those places are definitely much better off. But at the larger scale, the fuel buildup continues, the climate continues to worsen, making it warmer, lowering relative humidities, perhaps even causing changes in wind patterns and precipitation. And now we have more extreme fire weather when we get it. The problem we have in the US right now is that we put out every fire that we can, so we only get fire behavior associated with fires we can't put out. That means that the majority of the fire that we get is high severity fire that burns in a way that we don't want. And then more and more people are living in the wildland-urban interface, the place where wildland fuels come in contact with homes. And so there are more people in harm's way, and the harm is getting worse.
My dad's family's been here since the 1850s. So his father, grandfather, grandmother, great-grandmother, they're all raised up here. This is what the house looked like. My mother passed away a couple months ago, so I'm kind of glad that she's not here to see what happened. But yeah.
Been less than a month since this area burned. There's green leaves popping out all through the canopy of this forest. These trees are going to survive. They're going to be fine. So it's a fire-adapted ecosystem, for sure. It's the houses that were not very fire-adapted, unfortunately. Issues of community wildfire safety and forest ecosystem health led to the desire to do fuel treatment work. And so we've spent the last 25 years or so trying to work through that. And progress has definitely been made, but there's still work ahead of us.
The Car Fire and the cumulative impacts of fires over the last, decade of my living here in this really active fire environment, where you deal with this acute stress every summer and it persists over months, is, it's hard to live with. I just sort of back up to, this is a generational problem, right? We created it over generations, and so it's going to take generations to fix it. My job in my lifetime is to make an increment of progress towards something better. The Watershed Center, is an organization like many other community-based organizations that were born out of the timber wars. We came into our work with an idea that we could find this elegant solution that linked economic development with land stewardship. So we were raising money to run crews that are doing thinning all around the county in partnership with the Forest Service and private landowners. We were getting cooperative agreements to do prescribed fire work in and around our communities. And so hearing Melanie talk to me about what she's doing after the wine country fires last year, and we're already talking about ideas about how we're going to work together because we're doing this innovative prescribed fire work, and now people in Sonoma County want to do that same work. I've got something to share. This one here is a perfect example. This is a trailer blowout as well. And so here you go, it starts racing on a west wind, right? Communities here, as high school, we're like here. This isn't just a fuel treatment save the day.
Yeah.
Fire suppression still matters, preparedness, all those things, right? But this fire blows out, runs across town, looks like it's gonna be this conflagration, runs head on into this prescribed fire treatment, less than a year old, and just lays down. It literally cannot burn through that. And so it flanks, it lays down, they pick it up. Look, prescribed fire in this place makes the difference.
That's a great
and
story.
if we can start reinforcing that with these overlapping and, staggered polygons of fire, that actually...
You got to come tell that story in Sonoma County.
Yeah.
This fuel complex that we're standing in the middle of is kind of the classic Western problem of a relatively open, high fire frequency forest that's now been partially logged and left fire free for decades. And you can see the result. That's now choked full of second growth Douglas fir. So there are a lot of factors that have all kind of come together at the same time. Historical logging, grazing, and fire suppression allowed all these seedlings that had gotten established to grow up into the forest that has now gotten much more complex. It has big trees and small trees and live and dead fuels that can carry a surface fire from the ground all the way up into the canopy. But it's important to understand that there is a solution if we can just marshal the resources to get the work done. This is not an intractable problem.
Put in 3 maple bars.
3 maple bars?
And 3 chocolate-covered cake donuts.
Okay, sounds good.
In a box full.
Yeah.
Then why don't you put a couple of apple Danish in there too?
Okay, sounds good.
For my wife, if we don't, maybe we'll get home with them, maybe we won't. How about 2 of the chocolate walnuts? I think we got enough for lunch. In terms of the frequent fire landscapes where we have created these unnatural accumulations of fuels, we certainly have the opportunity to do restoration in these, but we can't simply put fire back into them. Most of them, because it's been so long now since there's been fire in these, the accumulations of fuels are so great that we would not be able to control a fire if we tried to put fire back into those, and everything would burn up just as it does with a wildfire. So what we need to do in many of these environments is in fact go in and begin by mechanically reducing those fuels by saw and the axe and removing that material when we can in order to help pay for the treatment that we're doing. Then it becomes possible to reintroduce fire or allow fire to reintroduce itself in those. One of the things that you do in one of these restoration treatments is obviously reduce the density of the forest and the amount of fuels that are present in it. What you leave behind are, for example, the large fire-resistant pine trees and larch trees in these forests. That's what they've done here. Dramatically reduce the stand density, and they have retained the oldest, largest pine trees that were present in this stand. Very important ecologically, and they're also the fire-resistant part of this forest. The neat thing here is we know what to do. It's just a question of whether we have the will to do it in terms of investing money and energy in restoring the fire-resistant condition. There are differences among the various environmental interest groups in terms of their attitude towards active management of forests. Nevertheless, many of the groups understand very clearly that it's time to end the timber wars and it's time to get back out there, that in fact we need to be engaged with these forests. We need to be helping these forests.
The forest wars have been such that nobody wins, and it's just sort of this war of attrition. You know, Mark's a pretty cerebral guy. He's really smart, he's very articulate, and he eventually saw the writing on the wall. And he didn't want his community to, dry up and blow away, which was what was going to happen. We want old growth and we want robust communities. Those are things that we all want. And there is a way to get there. And so those sorts of conversations started to develop on the Malheur with Blue Mountains Forest Partners. The goal of the organization is to bring together stakeholders to develop large landscape restoration projects on the Malheur that are science-based and that also have a socioeconomic benefit to the local community.
I talked to him years ago.
We got a lot of big but young trees out there that are the wrong species. Too many of them.
Taking them all.
And they gotta go.
So there's plenty of volume to be taken off. It's
Yes.
just not what historically we would have focused on.
Correct.
And it might require some market development and infrastructure retooling.
Yeah.
Learning curves.
Yes.
Is that what?
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
5 years in, it's
5
like,
years.
oh, whoops, learning
That's the
curve.
charitable way to put it. Yeah, I just look at SJ as a partner that's moving things along in really good ways. She and her husband bought a house here. They're good people.
Prairie Wood closed a number of years ago. Grant Western, which was an old growth ponderosa pine mill, also closed, leaving only Malheur lumber. They're the only infrastructure that is anywhere in that part of the country. The nearest milling infrastructure is either down in Southeast Oregon or in Northeast Oregon.
By and large, the industry in Eastern Oregon has shifted its attention, and it's not as committed at all to going after the bigger trees.
Malheur Lumber has retooled, which meant that they basically replaced all of their infrastructure that was designed to mill larger timber so that they could mill smaller diameter material. 18 to 23 is kind of their sweet spot. And there are a lot of those kinds of trees out on the landscape that need to go for restoration purposes. And so they're well positioned to capitalize on the restoration that's happening on the forest. Restoration looks different depending on where you are. It looks different on the west side of the Cascades than it does on the east side. On the east side, where we do have fire-prone forests or frequent fire forests, the restoration generally looks like retaining the oldest, biggest trees that still remain. There's not a lot of them, but you start with those as the backbone of your restoration approach, and then attempt to thin out the smallest trees that are ladder fuels and encourage the next generation of old growth trees to grow up as a result of sort of that succession process.
Almost everyone is on board now. They may not be in 100% agreement, but everybody agrees that what's been going on needs to change. And that's what the collaboratives are all about. They're about developing a social consensus that then provides the license for the agency to move forward with the programs.
We need to be doing a lot more restoration, which does include thinning and prescribed fire, than we are. The need is great, and we will never get there at the pace that we're going. There are a lot of barriers. The first is funding and staffing for the Forest Service. Forest Service is the biggest landowner in Eastern Oregon. They are not funded by Congress, and they are not staffed appropriately to put these kinds of projects together. They simply just don't have the money, and they don't have the people to do it.
It's such a small agency with such a large mission. The problems are not problems of attitude or technical information. The problem is insufficient budget and insufficient personnel to carry out what they're prepared to do.
This is my 33rd fire season. The normal is starting to be a fire season that starts earlier and ends way later. There's not really a non-fire season anymore. It seems like the fires are getting a lot larger. Normally we catch these fires at, 5,000, 10,000 acres. This is the Mendocino complex, and it's one of the largest in California's history. Beginning of the fire, a lot of the resources were tied to the Carr Fire in Redding, which had a lot of home loss, and so that was very important to have a lot of the resources there at the time. There's 21 units in the state, and they've all been directed to do fuel reduction projects, and we just got to catch up with it all.
Wildfire suppression operations are really quite expensive. The U.S. Forest Service itself, as the world's largest firefighting organization, it is now spending a vast amount of its budget. As high as 57% of the total budget was spent on fire-related activities. And to a certain extent, that was coming out of the other monies available for managing our lands. I mean, I always used to say that was kind of like telling the Coast Guard that you're not going to get to work because we spent your money on a hurricane. I mean, we wouldn't do that, and we shouldn't do that with forest managers.
So that's where the fire fix came in. It was a recognition that you have a budget, an agency budget that's not stable, that is pulling funds away from those programs that need to be funded. whether it's for fire risk reduction or anything else. It accesses disaster funding and creates a new source of funding for a portion of suppression. So you have two pots of funding, this flat level out of the normal appropriations process, and everything above that comes out of this new disaster fund. So you stabilize the Forest Service budget.
The fire funding fix is a big deal, and we're very, very proud of it. But now we have the next step that we need to do. We need to invest in all the proven work to support community efforts that are so vital that we need so we can learn about how to be fire-adapted communities. On federal Forest Service lands up there. Some pretty neat stuff up there.
The Forest Service estimates that 80 million acres of its 193 million acre land base is in need of some sort of restoration because it is at risk of catastrophic wildfire or insect and disease outbreaks. We need to be focusing on a restoration economy and approach, and we need to be making sure that we can reduce the wildfires that we've seen and protect our homes and our communities and the resources we care about. But that's not to suggest it's going to be an easy fix. A lot of the material that comes off of these forests is very small. It is very low value, and there's a lack of markets for it. So we are going to need to continue to have innovation and investment to make sure that we can remove that material for environmental purposes, not just for markets and economies. But they can definitely go hand in hand, and as we grow those markets, we're able to process and use more of that, and that helps us get more work done on the ground. Vaughan Brothers were one of the first mills that saw the writing on the wall, and they retooled their mills and got extremely efficient. So a lot of these trees that are being thinned to improve forest health are now going to that mill and creating wood products that we can buy in communities in the Northwest.
We're talking about millions of acres of problems, which means millions and millions of tons of material that need to come out. We need scalable solutions.
So this is where the logs come in from the log yard. The logs go from here right to the new saw and turn into lumber very quickly.
So the technology shift from basically taking a big log and whittling away from the outside and just cutting high quality boards all the way in to a small diameter log that was centered in the machine, that was kind of the technological shift that happened.
So as the logs come through here, he's just watching for all the different operations, making sure the flow works through the process. And then as that log comes through the machine, it gets positioned properly. And the important part in this process is that the logs are perfectly centered through there, and then they need to be turned properly so you get not only the most volume out of each log, but that it's cut with the grain properly so it lays flat. So when somebody goes to build with it, it's actually a straight piece of lumber.
To actually use the significant volume of small diameter, low value wood coming off of federal forest lands is going to require a lot of innovation in new markets. It's firewood, it's wood chips, it's biomass energy, electricity and heating that can offset fossil fuels. It's also really advanced high-value wood products like mass timber, cross-laminated timber that take a lot of this small diameter material and actually creates large engineered wood products.
Mass timber is a building process where we're using high-tech adhesives and processes to glue lumber together. And once that glue dries, the glue is actually stronger than the wood. So it's kind of like weaving the wood together.
Not only does that add value to those products, but it allows us to use wood in new ways, like building skyscrapers out of wood. And that creates a lot of environmental and public benefits, because not only are we using this wood and restoring the health of our forests, but we're reducing carbon emissions by building with wood in our communities instead of concrete or steel. A lot of that we've seen with the farm-to-table movement with food. People are really concerned about where their food comes from, how it was grown, who grew it, what processes went into it, is it safe, is it healthy? How often do you ask that question about the paper that you use or the wood that's in your house? But it's just as important. And so we're starting to tell the story and connect the public with their wood products and actually trying to create a holistic circle where they can actually understand where their resources come from and continue to support those economies and get more work done on the ground.
You would get into great difficulties if you turned over the management of these forests just to people who fought fire and were concerned with fuels. If you focus on a single outcome, such as fuel loadings, you tend to marginalize other important values, such as wildlife habitat, for example. You need to have interdisciplinary groups that are designing these restoration programs.
We're going to have prescribed fire here at Sonoma County Regional Parks right here in Sonoma Valley. Pretty excited about that.
This is for you. It'll really feel sweet by 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, so if it does get across that road down there, we'll have to pick that up just so we don't impact the power poles.
Yeah, hey, Cal Fire, you guys can integrate, with the local government here. You guys don't have to hang out in like separate pockets.
Now, also, we have an anticipated ignition sequence on the map shown by numbers and arrows. Steve and I will be communicating as he's at point A1, he's putting fire on the ground. Point A2, etc. Any questions so far?
Pretty exciting! I didn't know what the shroud was for until the fire got lit. I was like, oh, it's to keep smoke out of your lungs. It feels like the first ignition is kind of the iffiest because you just don't know. Because that's how I felt when you guys first ignited. Yeah. I was a little nervous because I was like, I don't know where this is going to go. But then once you see the trend, yeah, right? You just get into this like nonverbal communication and you're like in the flow. And it's just, it's an awesome feeling. You just know that person needs water or that person needs you to scrape and you're not even talking. We kind of had amnesia here in Sonoma County until the fires of October 2017. And now we've woken up and we know that we have to have a little bit of smoke and controlled fire before we get a mega fire coming through here. So it's really exciting to me. We're turning the corner.
I've known this girl since like elementary school, but we were never really friends. So when her house burned down, everyone was like, my condolences, like this is really sad and all of this. And my family was of course like, do you need anything? Like, can we help you? And she was like, yeah, I want to live with you. And we were like, because we didn't know her that well or anything. She ended up being like the best friend I've ever had. And we kept on being like, man, this is crazy. Like this never would have happened if your house didn't burn down. All right, do you guys know what you'd like to order? All right, what can I do for you?
We're going to continue to fight fire, but fire is also going to escape control. And it's there that we need to try to create the conditions that will allow the fires that do escape control to burn without catastrophic ecological damage.
the resilience of the landscape and the resilience of the community are the same thing. They're not people in nature.
My experience has been that you can make a difference. And what you do and what you learn and what you practice can make a difference. It makes me very, very grateful.
And so the people who are willing to think outside of those silos and find the new way, that's the fellowship. That's all of us. You know, you got to be able to pick your head up every once in a while and like hear other people's stories and have kind of shared purpose. But in truth, a generational problem, if you want to make progress on it, takes sacrifice.
So 2017 was the first big fire to hit Santa Rosa in a very long time, 60 plus years. And 2020, we already had the Wall Bridge fire. Everyone just repopulated, and now we have this glass fire complex on the east side of town.
So a stubborn fire, substantially impacted because of that 5-year historic drought.
It looks like a war zone. The whole city is quiet. A lot of it's out of power. You know, almost no one slept last night. I think people here are very fatigued. Very fatigued, yeah. My 86-year-old mom with lung conditions came at midnight last night. She was under evacuation order, and you can see the fire from our neighborhood up on the ridgetop. In the distance, this is from my neighborhood. If anything goes wrong, you go to Zach's, or you get the pets and you go to the Slater field, basically. Does that make sense? And you've got your phone charged? With each repeated event, people are going, oh, this is not a one-off, this is not an accident. But I think we are turning the corner with people's awareness. Basically just starting to get ready. I've got the important papers. I've got my firefighting stuff if we end up getting drawn into the response. These patterns are here to stay for the foreseeable future, and we need to prepare for it to save people's lives. So the story's not over here in Santa Rosa.
All right, welcome back. And so before we get into things with the panel, and I hope you enjoyed the film, just wanted to give you a few tips for helping to make the panel discussion a little bit more enjoyable for folks in the audience. So one thing you can do in your settings in Zoom is if everybody has their cameras off except for myself and our fine panel, you can say only view people who have their videos on, and then you'll be able to see the video. If other people, for whatever reason, still have their videos on, you can just click on our panelists as I'm introducing them in the, there's kind of some ellipses in the right-hand corner of people's view. And you can just hit pin that person, and that'll make their it'll kind of make their videos and their screens a priority for you. Okay. So with that, let me get to introducing our panel for this evening. And I'm really appreciative that they had time in the middle of fire season to join us. So first from Bekee Hotze, she oversees the management of 216,000 acres of National Forest System lands adjacent to the capital city of Salt Lake City, Utah. Her role as the Salt Lake District Ranger includes balancing the need to protect watersheds and those of the recreating public. Her district provides 60% of the culinary water to Salt Lake City, and is her primary consideration when making decisions on the landscape. The Ranger District also has over 6 million visitors per year, primarily in Little Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood, and Mill Creek canyons here in Salt Lake County. Visitation occurs year-round, and visitors enjoy a multitude of recreational experiences. Her current position has extensively involved working with others to help meet the needs of the American public. She has 5 focus areas where we collaborate with partners: fire and fuels, environmental stewardship and messaging, trails, restrooms, and graffiti abatement. Each of these groups is making meaningful progress within their respective disciplines to meet the goals and objectives of that group. For instance, the Fire and Fuels group has successfully obtained funding to do several fuels reduction projects in Lambs and Parley's Canyon. The restroom group has replaced and added 5 restrooms in the past 3 years, doubling the capacity at the existing sites. And the graffiti abatement group has reduced graffiti vandalism by up to 60%. Her strength has been in bringing people together and developing a shared vision for the future. So we're lucky to have Bekee. Thank you, Bekee, for being here. Our next panelist is Brian Trick, and he's the Wasatch Front Area Manager for the Utah Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. The counties of Morgan, Davis, Salt Lake, Tooele, and Utah encompass his management area. He graduated from the University of Utah with a BS in political science and economics in 2011. He received his master's of forestry from Oregon State University in 2017. Brian worked as a seasonal firefighter for the Forest Service for 10 years in a myriad of positions before joining Utah's Department of Natural Resources in 2018. So thank you, Brian, for being here tonight. And I believe Brian is managing a couple active fires right now. Robert Sanders is the fire warden for Salt Lake and Davis counties. He's spent the entirety of his career with fire, beginning in 1975 as part of the Palomar Hotshot crew on the Cleveland National Forest in Southern California. After 4 years with the Palomar Hotshots, he spent 15 years on an engine crew on the Cleveland. He moved to Utah in 1994, where he took a position as the Assistant Fire Management Officer with the then Wasatch National Forest. He has worked on nearly every forest in the state of Utah, including the Fish Lake, Dixie, and Manti-LaSalle. He took a mandatory retirement from the Forest Service in 2012, when he then began his position with the state of Utah's Forestry, Fire, and State Lands within DNR, where he works with and supports local municipalities with wildland fire, including suppression and management of these fires, aiding homeowners in the prevention, protection, and defense and indefensible space. Thanks, Robert, for being here. We're lucky to have your experience here in Northern Utah along the Wasatch Front. And Laura Briefer is the Director of Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities. She has served as the Director of Salt Lake Public Utilities since 2016. Laura has worked at Salt Lake City Public Utilities for 13 years in various areas of the organization and has 25 years of professional experience in natural resource and environmental professions in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from the University of California at Santa Barbara and a master's degree in public administration from the University of Utah. Laura is passionate about public service, sustainability, science, and public health. She comes from a close-knit family with strong commitment to public service, including parents, grandparents, and siblings who serve as firefighters, educators, and medical professionals. The global pandemic, earthquake, windstorm, and civil unrest that impacted Salt Lake City residents last year have only strengthened Laura's commitment to public service values. Thank you, Laura, so much for being here. And everybody has this nexus of fire on our panel, which is really cool. So before we dive into Q&A, I just wanted to kind of frame up. So we, as Bekee bio mentioned, we've secured some funding for lambs and parleys. And I think we wanted to give a little overview of that in just a minute, but to kind of cue it up, climate change, drought, population growth, increased forest visitation, infestation and disease, intrusion and expansion of the wildland-urban interface, which might be called a WUI tonight. So if you hear WUI, it means wildland-urban interface, and I'm going to be the acronym police tonight. So, and a legacy of fire suppression have resulted in an unnatural and in some instances, a dangerous forest condition. So 34% of Utah's land mass is forested. However, in the second driest state in the country, much of our population lives near these forested watersheds because we're reliant on the water that flows from these mountains to sustain many critical aspects of our lives. Fire is part of our ecosystem. However, the intensity and frequency of fires we are seeing, exacerbated by the aforementioned issues, and that's just to name a few of the issues, threatens many values. The health of our watersheds, our homes, our wildlife populations, recreational and aesthetic values, and certainly, the economy of our local communities. So Bekee and Brian, maybe you can give just a quick overview of the Salt Lake County Watershed Fuels Reduction Program. And Laura and Robert, feel free to augment and supplement where needed.
Brian, do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead, Bekee.
All right. So a couple of years ago, we started meeting to talk about where can we do an effective fuels treatment. I believe Salt Lake City Public Utilities had tried to do a fuels treatment in City Creek Canyon, and that was not very successfully implemented. I don't want to put words out there for you, Laura, but it was pretty much, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was shut down based on the public perception of what that fuels treatment was and what it would do. So we, Brian, Carl, Salt Lake City Public Utilities started having regular meetings a couple years ago about where we could start having some fuels treatments, start gaining some buy-in and support, where we weren't shocking Salt Lake Valley by cutting down trees and removing trees. So we agreed that Lambs Canyon needed some work, and it had some visitation, but not a lot. So we weren't going to have a lot of people complaining if we start cutting down trees and putting up piles. And then we also decided that it really did need some work because a lot of trees were starting to die in that canyon just because of the different diseases and insects that Carl had mentioned. So that's kind of why we chose Lambs Canyon. And then as we started having those conversations about Lambs Canyon, that's when more and more projects have started coming up in Mill Creek and Big Cottonwood. And it seems like we're starting to start to snowball with the need and the desire from the homeowners to have these fuel projects. And we're just trying to keep pace. But we worked with, and I saw Dax was on here as well, we worked with the Department of Natural Resources and put in a proposal to WRI, which is Carl, Watershed Restoration Initiative. I caught myself on that one. And we were awarded some money to do some surveys and make sure that we met environmental compliance. And then we were awarded this year to go in and do some actual treatments in those canyons. Did I get that, Brian, or am I missing some stuff?
Yeah. perfect. I think the only thing that I would add is that we chose Lambs Canyon because it was kind of a confluence of all of our agencies or areas of jurisdiction, if you will. So we found communities where the state would then kind of be able to take the lead. We wanted to try and find places where the watershed also needed, protection, and any work we did could potentially benefit as well. And then of course, natural forest land. And so with that and all three kind of minds together is when we're able to put together our proposal and our project and get some money through WRI and then the new shared stewardship agreement that we have in the state of Utah. So I think that's really anything or everything I have to add.
And WRI, again, is the Watershed Restoration Initiative, and that's a program of the state of Utah, correct?
It is, yep. The state of Utah kind of runs it, but it has lots of financial input from the federal government and federal agencies, as well as private organizations and environmental groups and those sorts of things to bolster our funding and our efforts so we can really make a difference.
And I also want to add, sorry, since you brought up the funding, we also were awarded some funding through shared stewardship, which is a partnership between the state and the federal agencies. And so they are I want to say our primary partner, but this project in Lambs Canyon started getting more and more support. So we were able to get some funding from private companies as well and utilities. So it's at least the funding, I feel very successful in getting that. The project itself, what we're planning on doing is a conglomeration of different fuels treatments. We'll be doing cutting and chipping, which you can see up in Big Cottonwood already around a number of homes. And if you go to Donut Falls, they do a lot of chipping in there. Then what we'll also be doing is cutting, piling, and burning. And if you want to see examples of that, you can go into the Spruces Campground. We've been doing that for the last couple of years. And then we'll also be doing some mastication, but that will be mostly along the I-80 corridor, and that will be in the oak brush. So those are the primary treatments we'll be doing, but then we'll be doing some other things, especially like the state UFA. They're going to be working around the homes. So I don't know if Robert, if you want to talk about the work that's going to be tying into the private lands around there, but that will help provide some defensible space as well.
Anything, Robert, more?
Yeah, as far as dispensable space, just kind of working with the communities to make sure they can do any kind of clearing to harden up their homes in these areas. And what we're kind of looking at too is a lot of these canyon areas and the communities like Lambs Canyon. My main focus is on the access points of these communities, as far as one way in, one way out type scenarios, and getting that apparatus and firefighters in there safely at the same time we're doing evacuations.
Well, I would like to kind of give a little bit of perspective from the water utility side of things on the purpose and need for this collaboration. And many people that are on today probably have heard something about this in different areas of the Western United States, but severe wildfire within watersheds that provide municipal water supplies have a demonstrated impact on water quality and infrastructure and the availability of those supplies. And what we've noticed in the last several years is that the severity in watersheds, such as those that Denver Water relies on, San Francisco had a situation at Hetch Hetchy, the city of Santa Rosa and Sonoma County fires that were mentioned in the film, all of these have had impacts in one way, shape, or form on water quality, the availability of supplies, water supplies, and the water infrastructure itself. So whether it's treatment plants or dams, another example would be locally, Central Utah Water Conservancy District and the impacts of the Diamond Ridge Fire on Strawberry Reservoir and their treatment processes. And so water utilities, especially across the West, and including us, are just becoming much more focused on identifying where the risks are in our watersheds. And Lambs Canyon is one of the drainages that flows into Mountain Dell Reservoir and then is treated at the Parley's water treatment plant and supplies a good portion of our service area, which extends from Cottonwood Heights to the south to Salt Lake City to the north. And, you know, all of these watersheds, City Creek, Parley's and Lambs, Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood, what we're seeing is potentially a change in risk due to a number of factors with respect to fire. So, you know, in addition to the property issues and the safety and public health issues, you know, the water resource issues have really been front and center for us and really brought us into this collaboration on Lambs and in other conversations.
Great, thank you all. So maybe kind of going to the film. Oh, actually, there was a good message here. We mentioned this defensible space. Hey, Robert, could you kind of describe what that means?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure can. What you're looking at as far as the individual homeowners, we've got a format to where it's got a home ignition zone. There's 3 of them out there. There's your immediate, intermediate, and your extended. And what we're looking at doing is around your home itself, you know, put a 5 foot, at least a 5 foot buffer around the foundation of your home, your home itself, eliminate any kind of burnable type material. Then you go further out to your 5 to 30 foot portion of your intermediate zone. And that's where you want to kind of do your shaded type fuel break, or you can still grow trees, but just space them out and just take care of your ladder fuels. What your ladder fuels are indicators like you got small vegetation underneath your larger trees. You want to clear that out. So when you do get a fire passing through, it's not going to get up into the canopy. The thing that we really look at is try to keep the fire out of the canopy so you have more control. Once it gets in the canopy, it's off to the races as far as a wind event type scenario. So it's hard to control when it's up in the canopy. Further out, you're looking at 30 to 100 foot, and that's where you can start doing some thinning, spacing out the trees. You'll get them at least over 20 foot spaced apart on the tops of the trees, the crowns, that type of thing. So if you don't have that type of property where you have that much to work with, do as much as you can, you know, with the property that you're allowed to do it in, within your boundaries. So eliminate anything that's around your home itself. You're not only looking at vegetation, you're looking at the storage of wood debris, firewood, and that type of thing, anything that could ignite. One of the things you want to really keep an eye out is for like the fire that Bekee has in the background there, the Morgan fire. The other day, that thing spotted a mile and a half away from the main fire itself with the wind event that they did have. So you want to keep in mind when you get a fire in the area, the embers are what's going to catch your house. So make sure you're fireproof around your property.
And spotting would be driving force that rolls the fire forward a little bit, or kind of.
Yeah, what it does, it creates a separate fire from the main fire itself. It kind of pushes ahead, and you can't put firefighters in between the main fire and the spot fire, so it creates a lot of problems. So, but anyway, the spot fires are what a lot of your home ignitions are started from the ember fallout.
Got it. And then does with defensible space, is it protecting your homes from a fire, or is it protecting the forest from your homes, or kind of both?
Oh, it could be both. Yeah, say if you were to, there's areas out there, if you had a home fire, barbecue, or something like that, and start something in your property, it'll help suppress or slow down the fire before it gets into the forest also. So it can work both ways.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's kind of pivot to the film a little bit. So, you know, of course, the film focused primarily on Washington, Oregon, and California, and the conditions there. You know, how do Utah's forests, and kind of let's focus on the Wasatch a little bit, since that's where our project's at. How do they are they different from those forests, and how? Like, do we have different vegetation types a little bit, or kind of walk us through maybe some of the differences?
So I'm not familiar with the forests that are there, but I can tell you what we have here. And what we had was settlers coming into the area about 1847. And over the course of about 50 years, they had cut down all of the trees. They had grazed the area extensively, and they had also started mining. 1904, Forest Service, or I should say the General Land Office, created one of the first forest reserves in the country, and that was my district, which is the Salt Lake Forest Reserve at the time, but that's now part of my district. And they kind of tasked us with maintaining water quality, as you know, for the city of Salt Lake, because their water had become so dirty. We started working with the city back then with Spruce's Campground, which is now Spruce's Campground. It used to be a nursery where we planted millions of trees. So our trees are we have a robust diversity of species in our canyons, but we have a very even age. So our trees are typically about 120 years or younger. We don't have the old growth like what they were talking about in the film, but we do have a pretty young forest. In terms of fire, we do have fire adapted forests on the Wasatch Cache. And the trees that I have up here, the fire return interval can be anywhere from a couple of years to 150 to 300 years. So depending upon the different types of vegetation determines what kind of fire return interval we have.
Anyone else?
And Carl, I can maybe speak to the species. I mean, you know, what we have here as far as species are very similar to Eastern Oregon. Our productivity rates are lower just because we are the second driest state, but we have the same smattering of Doug fir, Rocky Mountain Doug fir. We have ponderosa in places, Engelmann spruce, those sorts of species. But the big difference of note, and they showed in the movie, is Oregon has the west side versus the east side, right? And so they have those legacy forests and the huge trees, the huge Doug fir, and our biome in Utah is pretty similar across all forests that we have here. So that's just one thing to kind of point out.
Thanks. So the film also talked a lot about this idea of actively managing our forests, and there was even talk about, you know, cultivating these landscapes. And so, what does actively managing these places really? What does that look like? And have we been doing it?
So it's all in your terminology, right? And what you mean, and what you're specifically talking about. Have we been actively managing it for recreation? Yes. Are we getting overrun by recreation? Yes. In terms of fuels reduction, it's kind of a new thing, I want to say, for the front. When I first came here 6 years ago, we hadn't done a lot of fuels treatments. Some of the homeowners were interested in it, but in general, it was kind of shied away from. People wanted to go up there, they wanted to see the trees. But in the last couple of years, we've had all of those ramifications of not thinning the forest come to light. We've had the spruce beetle come through. We've had a pine beetle come through. We've had fir engravers. We've had a lot of diseases. We've had a new thing that's called the balsam woolly adelgid. See, this is why we use acronyms. It's BWA. That's come through. It's originally from Germany, and it's pretty new in Utah. Within a couple of years, it started like 4 or 5 years ago in Farmington Canyon, and now it's all the way down into Utah County. It impacts every single age class of subalpine fir. And so that is another new one. And you're seeing a lot of dead trees. And then we had that wind event. So I know Laura kind of listed the litany of things that she's been dealing with over the last year. Add a wind event to that too, because we have a lot of dead trees now that are falling on the ground. And so now it's just becoming really apparent that we have to do something.
And Carl, I might want to weigh into on the watershed side of things. Salt Lake City Public Utilities has a very active watershed management program. We've developed plans and vulnerability assessments. But our vulnerability assessments in the past have really focused on more of the recreation and sanitary conditions, some invasive species type of things. And this year, we started actually a vulnerability assessment of the fire risk to the watershed from a water-centric perspective. And that's something that we'll be bringing to the public later this year upon its completion as part of a revised watershed management plan. And that's also something that we are working on with Bekee's team, to make sure that there's alignment between sort of methodology and that type of thing. And but I think with changing climate and some of these more intense droughts and some of the things that Bekee mentioned, the condition is changing around us, and I think this is the right time for us to be thinking about adaptation.
So what might this active management look like? What types of treatments and tools? I know, Bekee, you mentioned a couple of them when you were describing the LAMS project, but are there other things that we might be looking at? And what I know the logging was kind of one of the central components of that film. What types of things won't we use here, and our prohibitions types of things?
Well, and one of the people, and I wish I had written down the names of all of the people in the movie, but he had that really strong forestry background. He was saying that we can't do prescribed burns because we can't control them. We have such a high fuel loading here. And so what we're going to have to do first is break up our fuels into boxes or to bite-sized pieces and somehow do those mechanical treatments in boundaries so that we can get rid of some of those fuels. And that's what we're talking about in Lambs Canyon. I mentioned a couple of different treatment options, but the intent of doing those treatment options is creating a shaded fuel break. So if the fire does come down to the road, we would be able to use that shaded fuel break to control that fire instead of sending our airplanes up and using our retardant. And helicopter drops, everybody loves those the big air shows, the VLATs, another acronym for you, which just means very large air tanker. Makes you sound cool when you say it. But people love that, right? They are like, oh, we're being saved, here's the VLAT. Well, in actuality, if you're using those types of resources to put out the fire and the fire wants to burn, you're just kind of kicking that can down the road a little bit. You're saving all of that fuel for later. So you're not really helping any situation further down. So we have to do the mechanical fuel treatment to get rid of the fuels, and we're doing it where we can. And most of that is along roads or along trails, in campgrounds, around homes, hopefully around enough homes. But I'll let Brian and Robert to add in some of that as well.
Yeah, maybe if one of you guys can talk a little bit more about what mechanical treatment might mean.
Yeah, Bekee, on that one there, you can not only use the machinery, but you're looking at crews out there with chainsaws and cutting and stacking and piling during the winter time type scenario. You can use that kind of treatment too. So, and more likely that's what you'd be falling back on quite a bit. So, and one more thing about doing the prescribed burning along the front area, problems we ran into in the past when I first got up here on the end of Wasatch Cache, because we did a prescribed burn up in Davis County, but we had issues with smoke quality. We had to look at the air shed, and Salt Lake City is in the high air shed air state, class 1 air shed, so it's pretty difficult to do any kind of prescribed burning on the front.
Anything to add, Brian or Laura?
I think so. As far as mechanical thinning, that is kind of in the name to a degree. We will have equipment in there that is actually typically used for logging because that's the most efficient at removing trees. And so that is always something we consider and think about too as an impact to the land, but it's the most efficient way to, and cost wise, to also make to make any impact really. And like Bekee was saying, we really do have to get in there first and foremost to remove all of the legacy down and dead before we can even really plan for anything more effective on a larger scale, like a prescribed fire. And to Robert's point too, yeah, we have been having discussions about what prescribed fire would look like and how we can do it in Utah. And it escapes me now, but we've had legislation try to go through to kind of reevaluate our elevations where we can, how high we can burn to be above the airshed. And if we know we can track the smoke, we know it's going to go one way, but the origin of the fire or the prescribed fire is in the airshed, can we still go through with that? So things are developing, and it's pretty exciting right now to be in Utah and to be considering prescribed fire as a tool.
Carl, I wanted to, we had a kind of a pre-prep meeting with all of this panel the other day, and our fire experts here reminded us that doing this type of fuels treatment doesn't negate the presence of the fire. It can affect the severity of the fire and some of the other, safety and property issues. And so from a water perspective, I do want to point out that there are 2 points in a fire that impact water quality and water supplies. One is during active burning, and that's when ash and contaminants that are associated with ash can settle on streams and lakes and reservoirs. And then the other is sort of the long-term impact after a fire. So the loss of vegetation can lead to more erosion, can lead to eutrophication of the water resource. It can change the magnitude and timing of snowmelt runoff. There are a number of those types of impacts that as a water manager, I want to be prepared for either a more severe or a less severe fire. And a less severe fire, I think the impacts would be a lot less. So this conversation about the fuels treatment is really important. But another part of the conversation is how can we put in certain best management practices so that the runoff after a fire, for instance, during a big storm, is better managed. And that's one of the things that we're studying in our watershed management plan. And we don't have all the answers yet, but an example could be you typically find issues at road crossings like culverts. Are culverts sized big enough under the highways or roads in order to decrease the impact of sedimentation? The treatment plants themselves are designed for a certain quality of water. Are there things on the treatment plant side that we may need to consider in the long term, and as we're redesigning and replacing some of our 50-something-year-old water treatment plants, that's something that we're considering.
Awesome. A lot of connected issues with all of this, and we're not just looking at fire, the presence of fire. We're looking at the severity and the intensity, and there are many factors that go, and air quality, right? I mean, yeah, we don't want to smoke everybody out in the process. So you mentioned a little bit, Laura, about how this will protect water supply. What about forest resilience and wildlife habitat? And then maybe, I think we're lucky, at least Save Our Canyons, we feel we're lucky to have wilderness areas and these roadless units across the Wasatch Range in the area that we're talking about. How do those types of designations affect your ability to do work, or do they?
So I'm actually going to bring up Neff's Canyon fire last year, and Brian and I were both agency administrators on that, and that just means that we provide leaders intent, and we provide management direction for the fire responders. And then Robert was also there as well. So Neff's Canyon, you actually have people who are on their back deck who can put their hand out and have their hand in wilderness. I mean, that's how close wilderness is to people's homes there. And so for us, for the Forest Service, once you're in wilderness, you can't have mechanized equipment. And mechanized equipment are bicycles, chainsaws, obviously ATVs, those kinds of things. So the only way that we can do a fuels treatment in wilderness is if we were to go out there with a cross-cut saw. And that's very labor intensive, especially if you're cutting oak. If anybody's ever cut oak, it's really hard. So it's really difficult for us to do a fuel break, protect private homes on Forest Service when their properties are built so close to Forest Service land. In terms of the other stuff, roadless, yeah, we can't build roads. I mean, obviously the name implies, but we are limited in what kind of treatments we can do. But even without those land management designations, we're also limited by our slopes. And so even if we didn't have wilderness or we didn't have roadless in the areas that we do have, we still would have a difficult time doing the treatments like what they were talking about in the movie with logging operations. That would be incredibly difficult here just because you can't get the equipment in there without doing some serious damage to it.
When you're talking slopes, you're just talking about the steepness of the Wasatch.
Yes.
Great. Maybe transition over to, and it sounded, Brian, you mentioned, I guess, policy changes. So obviously that's not an on the ground tool, but that is a tool in and of itself, right? That we need to be exploring constantly and looking at how we can change policies to enable, you know, our ability to respond to some of these conditions on the forest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, I don't think it's fair to say that our hands are tied now, but there's always things that we discover when maybe we have a grand idea and then we run up against something where we're limited, where we have a restriction. And so all these kind of these things come out in the planning process, and the ones that to a degree maybe they make sense at times, but you know, as far as what we need to do to the landscape to really improve it and to actually, you know, manage it for the future, we're always looking for those little things that we can change that aren't going to have a detrimental effect, and in fact will just free us up to maybe do more things. So like I mentioned, smoke and from a prescribed fire is a big one. And there's also policy as far as getting funding. I know this is a little bit of a segue, but you know, we had the fire fix, and so that's funding also for firefighting, and that helps, you know, just kind of hopefully ease the stresses on the federal budget for the Forest Service and the other land management agencies to be able to still have an operating budget for things like off-season thinning or off-season. When I say that, that's off-fire season, for actually being able to go in and do work there. So fire fix, other legislation, there's quite a few out there that are being introduced. I would embarrass myself if I tried to get the right Senate bill number and all that, but there are things going through from Romney now and Curtis that are interesting, and we'll see where they go, and then they'll be useful tools hopefully, and we'll monitor those.
So funding keeps coming up. So how is firefighting? They mentioned in the film how much of the Forest Service budget is going to firefighting. Is it better to put the fires out, or is it better to try and do some of these treatments from a funding perspective, and where is the funding coming from, and what opportunities should we be looking for?
And so maybe Robert and Brian have some general numbers for how much it costs to suppress a fire, and then also how much it costs for some of the treatments. But in general, treatments can be a couple $100s per acre up to our area, which is a little bit more challenging, and we're looking at about $1,400 per acre. Suppressing wildfires, one of the cheapest fires is about 2,000 per acre that I've been part of. And then some of the ones that have been more expensive have been a lot more than 2,000. So like The ones along the front where we do bring in the VLATs, the very large air tankers, those tend to be pretty expensive just because the aircraft is expensive and the aircraft needs a lot of support to make sure that the pilots are safe and that the ground resources below the pilots are safe.
Yeah, as far as the costs on the fire, actually the one that you're dealing with, the Morgan Canyon fire, I've got it's probably a low estimate right now, but it's at $780,000 just for up until this date. So it's going to grow as far as cost. If you're talking the pack fire down south with here in Utah, you're looking at $8.3 million, to suppress that fire, and that cost is still going up. VLAT, if we were to use a VLAT along the front, which we do use quite often now here lately, you're looking at $40,000 for one load for that VLAT, very large aircraft. Now helicopters, the costs go up. You're looking at $2,000 an hour for helicopter usage. So it's very, very expensive on the wildland portion of it. Suppression.
Yeah, and on that, the one that we're on right now, the Morgan Canyon fire, it was about $400,000 for the first day for the air suppression. And as you know, that was started with a plane accident. It's been in the news. So the first day we were really kind of focusing on suppressing the fire as best we could to get the investigators in there and see if there were any survivors. And then after they did the extractions, we were able to kind of focus more on the fire. So after spending $400,000 that first day, the cost for the next 4 days, today, Robert, it's $964,000. So it's gone up a little bit, but it's not at the same pace that it was that first day.
So $8 million, what is this treatment that we're potentially looking at, Brian? How does it measure up? What could you do with $8 million on the Wasatch as far as preventative work?
Oh, so much. Yeah, I'm the entire, I think the Parley's Canyon ask that we had, which combines the Watershed Restoration Initiative funding and shared stewardship. I want to say total, it was 1.3 million, and that was over multiple years. So for the cost of a small fire on the Wasatch front, we can do years of treatment and hopefully really make an impact to not only the landscape, but to protect homes, hardened homes, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's astonishing the difference. And we always want to do preventative work rather than be reactive and then spend money and also put folks in danger. So that's the big thing too. Fighting fire is very dangerous, and our mechanical thinning is less so. So that's another issue.
As the daughter and sister of firefighters, I second that. Very, very dangerous. I also want to say the cost that we're talking about on these fires don't include some of the other downstream costs, like loss of the water resource, loss of water infrastructure, damage to other infrastructure. If you look at Santa Rosa, that was in the film, and also if you look at the fire in Northern California, it escapes my mind, Paradise Fire. Economic, like in Paradise especially, just economic, the cost of the economic ruin there was quite significant. So, there are cascading impacts to cost, aside from the firefighting, which is also quite expensive.
Got it. No, I think that's very important to factor in. That $8 million is just to put the thing out, but that doesn't bring back all the things that it destroyed. I want to pivot real quick and take a couple of questions that folks submitted. So we got this question from someone who's attended. What does the future of the West realistically look like when we think about the current trends with drought and fires? Does the panel personally believe that the situation will improve given the impacts we're seeing from climate change?
Can I kind of give a little bit of answer, and you guys can jump into a little bit. Is it going to get better? Well, that's in my mind. This is my personal thought on that. No, it's not here in the near future. Back when I first started in 1975 on the shock crews on the fire in a Big Sur area of Central California, Northern California, it was on the Marble Cone fire in 1977. At that time, there was the largest fire in the history of California at 198,000 acres. Nowadays, 190,000 acres is nothing. What we're looking at here, when I first came to Utah after moving out of California, there's a trend that I've noticed here. And again, like on that video, the gentleman talked about the last 10, 15 years. Okay, that's Oregon. Okay, in the last 10, 15 years here in Utah, there's also been a trend being established. And this started back there from what I've observed is back in 2012. You're looking at the Wood Hollow fire down central Utah that burnt 45,000 acres. That's pretty unusual for a fire to get that large at that time period for Utah. Now we're starting to see fires, we got Patch Springs fires, which I was involved with, 13,000 acres. And I'm talking these for large type fires, but they're fires that are also burning down people's homes, the structures. And this has been going on for quite I got a whole list of names here that we're dealing with. It's that trend again, like I mentioned, just like Oregon. We're starting to see that trend here in Utah. So things are changing. And like I say, all the way up into our own neighborhoods. We've got the fire here in Davis County, the gun range fire, burned 3 homes there. Uinta fire back in 2017, we burnt down 3 homes there also. So it's a trend. And these homes aren't brand new. They've been there for years. So we're starting to see a change in fire behavior. We're starting to see a change in our fuel conditions. What are fuel conditions we're talking about are vegetation like the brush and the grasses and that type of scenario. Bekee mentioned about the bug kill up there, up in the higher elevations. That's what they're dealing with on this Morgan fire, the high elevation type fire, which they predicted this was going to happen. And these are large trees, and these trees are being fully consumed, when they're burning. They're not leaving logs on the ground. They're actually, all they're leaving is ash on the ground. And these are green trees, live trees. Wow. And we see that on a lot of the mountaintops in Davis County. I've observed, like Bekee mentioned, the last few years, each canyon is starting to get more and more standing dead. I'm looking at 80% standing dead, plus you got vegetation that trees are falling down on the ground. So you got 2 layers right there. Now we had that windstorm back in September, and now we got green trees on top of the 2 layers of dead trees. So that just creates a bigger problem. So if we were to get a fire, it's going to be high intensity. It's going to be one of those scenarios where you just kind of have to pull back and let the fire burn its way out of the larger field types into the smaller field types where we can actually do a good with it, manage the fire. So right now, as far as it going to get better, not for a while, unless we start getting more involved with field treatments and getting the public more involved also to do their share around their properties, get more proactive and take care of their issues too, so we can help us out. What I mean by helping out is doing structure protection when we do these type of fires in the communities at foothills. We're putting firefighters' lives at risk. There's a fire back in 2006 out in California where we had a Forest Service engine crew, engine 57. They were doing structure protection, trying to protect some person's home. They ended up losing their lives on that fire. 5 individuals off an engine crew lost their lives trying to protect somebody else's property, not their property, but somebody else's property. Back in 2003, the Cedar Fire in Southern California lost a firefighter doing structure protection, got separated from the crew and the engine, their safety zone, and got caught in between. So it's something that's very, very, it gets to my heart that we're putting firefighters' lives at risk to save someone's property. So I would love to have the public get more involved with either individually or as a community, get the community together, come up with a plan, come up with some projects around your property to eliminate some of the fuel. But I want to warn you, don't let get that false sense of security. You can do all the vegetation treatments you want, But fires do, like I mentioned earlier, you get that ember fallout, will start fires. And we do get wind events just like California, like the Santa Anas. You get a wind event out there, it burns down whole neighborhoods. We're no different, except we have ours in shorter duration when we do have these wind events. But all you need is that right recipe. So people need to be prepared, come up with a plan, and be more proactive.
Did anyone?
Robert, I have firsthand experience with that as my family home burned down in the Woolsey fire in 2018. In Malibu, it was one of those, Santa Ana winds, and just the entire community burned down because of embers going from house to house.
Yeah, once it gets in a neighborhood, it's we have a certain categories in the wildland portion where different fuel types goes everywhere from the grasses to timber slash and that type of thing. Logging. Now we're looking at neighborhoods. That's a whole different fuel type now that we're dealing with. So we need to add that to the category to our toolbox. But anyway, yeah, you get to neighborhood and there's nothing you can do with it. It's very like California. How many times or how often do you hear of a Walmart burning down? During a wildfire. It's pretty highly unusual, but it does happen. So people need to realize that we live in a fire-prone area. This is we're up against the wall, and we need to deal with it. And like I say, don't be complacent. Is what I'm trying to say. Don't be complacent about it. Everybody needs to pull their part, not just the government, but in the state, but also the private homeowners need to take care of their portion too.
And is this then? We hear about these fires affecting the communities. How are they going to affect? Is it just going to burn through these forests and then they're done burning and everything just starts growing back? Is that what we're going to be looking at in the West in the future, or is the change going to be more substantial, more intense?
I can kind of relate back to Davis County up on the skyline up there. The one good thing that I am seeing up there is, get a lot of the dead timber up there and the fuel loading. But I'm starting to see a comeback in the aspen growth. It's kind of starting to take over up there. I have noticed that, but I can say right now, it's near future. That's not going to stop anything that happens. But so there could be a vegetation change in some areas.
And remind people why encouraging aspen growth is good.
From what little I know about it, it's aspen needs disturbance in the root system. Once they get that type of disturbance, whether it's fire or whether it's mechanical, it'll start regenerating itself and get more established. From what I understand, the conifer type trees overtook in years past that overtook the stands of aspen. Now the aspens are starting to turn around and come back, at least the areas that I've observed.
Great. So another question we got was, 90% of Utah's wildfires being human caused. Do you think that the current education program and restrictions are significant enough to alter this behavior? What else would you like to see in an effort to reduce this number of human caused forest fires?
Yeah, I can feel that one. So we noticed about two years ago that we were just seeing a huge uptick in human caused starts. They've always been prevalent, but more so than ever. And so we've undergone a new strategy really and approach to it. And what we're doing is the state, as well with our federal partners, we're developing a new program with a design to try and just change human behavior. So anyone who, and I don't have a psychology background, but anyone who does will tell you that's very difficult. But that's our undertaking, that's our attempt. And so for some folks who have seen it, you'll see the billboards, and it's the new, the drill sort of a deal. And it's that saying that we all know what we need to do, we just seem to not be doing it. And so whether it is putting out your campfire and fully extinguishing it, whether it is, looking where behind your target, if you're shooting out in the desert, whatever it is, maybe not using exploding targets around vegetation. These really are no brainers, and we tend to still figure it won't happen to us, right? Not me. And so that's our effort. And if it comes down to everyone is responsible. So if you see something, point it out. I think I would encourage anyone to educate anybody if they see it isn't right as far as being fire wise and fire conscious. I think another thing is I would say as a state employee, so my boss and Robert's boss is the governor, and he is advocating for firework restrictions. I myself, as the area manager, would advocate for greater firework restrictions. And as a former firefighter, and I think Robert, as a current firefighter, would advocate for greater firework restrictions. So those are things that I would like to see.
Great.
I'm open for ideas on that one, Carl. I think our best success is when we have one-on-one conversations with people, or one in a small group. So, approaching a group of campers that are having a campfire during fire restrictions and explaining, the importance of why we don't have those fire restrictions, and having that, one-on-one conversation. What we tend to do is put up signs, and our signs aren't red. But luckily, at least along the Wasatch front, they're not shot at. So we do have that going for us, but they're still not red. So any ideas that you guys have for helping us with that? I have 8 permanent employees, and this year in the summertime, I have 55 with seasonal, and trying to have that one-on-one conversation when we have 6 million people up there is almost impossible. Well, I won't say almost, it is impossible, right? So I'm open for anything that you have.
Well, we'll have to keep that going, but I hope other people watching can chime in and send us all ideas if you have them. So, people are wanting to be action oriented. What are the number, 3 to 5 actions that people really can take to help resolve this problem? And I've even gotten comments, we have people that are just, obviously the recreating public. We have people that live in some of these canyon environments that are concerned. They want to know what they can do. Even people have asked, where can I send money to help with this problem? So what can people do?
That's a tough one, because I actually deal with that quite a bit with going on patrols, or I get calls at 2 o'clock in the morning to go check on Firebreak Road, got a campfire. And like I say, it's constantly trying to educate people. Human nature. Some people don't care if they get educated or not. They're going to have their campfire whether we want them not to or not. They're going to do that. So this is my personal thought, is that we need to have stricter laws on that type of situation. That's a tough one. They need to be broadcast. I can see people starting fires. We need to let people know that that they're going to be fined or whatever, sent to court on it. It needs to be more strict, in my mind. So, and as far as fireworks restrictions on that, every fire chief I've talked to in Salt Lake Valley and Davis County, they're all for it. Because what that does there, if they got to respond to fireworks being shot off in the neighborhood, they got to they got to get out of their ambulance mode. They got to get in the brush truck. So that's taking away services to the public that actually need help away from the taxpayers' money, because they got to go chase down fireworks or grass fires. So they don't have the staffing to cover everything either. They got to get rid of one to do the other job. So, and a lot of people, the public, don't know that.
Great.
Carl, some of the lessons we've learned on other efforts to encourage voluntary participation in sort of broader public good types of situations, like for instance, water conservation. You know, we have a real opportunity window right now with this unprecedented drought, with the amount of fires we have going on across the West, to really, you know, use that window to do some really good education. Like what we found, for instance, on conservation is really when California was going through a drought and there was a huge media presence on that drought, we saw water conservation in our community as a result of that, right? And I think, you know, taking advantage of all of the media and reports that we're hearing and we're faced with every day in terms of our educational and outreach might go a long way and stick with people as well.
Great. And I just want to call out this in the chat. We got someone suggesting maybe working with UDOT to make sure we get those road signs to talk about the importance of being fire aware and not lighting fires and things like that. That's a great idea. There's some other being collaborators with people who have larger microphones than some of us. I don't know if there's anything else that the panel, we're just after 8 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you all, you know, you probably all have had long days, and Robert, it sounds like you can have some long nights too. So are there any other just kind of things that you want to just promote, touch on, you know, point people to some resources about what's going on? Personally, I think all I want to say is there are a lot of elected officials and public servants out there doing the right thing right now, stepping out, and I think we just need to rally around them and support them as a community, because well, it gets a little frustrating to me. My brother's out on fires right now as well, so you know, there's a personal cost, but there's certainly a significant cost to our communities, because when things in the state of Utah catch on fire, it's all of our you know, tax dollars that are flooding to put those things out. So it really, I personally believe, you know, at the state level, we really need to take some significant action. It is a state and local. And everybody, NGOs and communities, which is what I've really just appreciated about working with all you guys. So any other items that you guys want to bring up, I'd point out, I'd love to hear it right now before we let everyone go.
Maybe. Yeah, go ahead, Becky.
I just wanted to say thank you, Carl, for organizing events like this so that we can start getting that voice out and start educating, or at least not even educating, just having that conversation with people and making sure that there's just a two-way dialogue. So thanks, Carl, for hosting.
Thanks for being here.
I wanted to bring up, if folks want to visit the site, it's Fire Sense at Utah Wildfire. And you can also look up utahfireinfo.gov, get any kind of information. And my last comment is I say it again, as a community, eventually it's going to happen. It's going to affect somebody out here in the valleys one way or another. Be prepared, be proactive and not reactive at 2 o'clock in the morning. And also when you get in neighborhoods, like Becky mentioned, the nest fire, looking at the communities. I was part of the group that actually had to drive around the neighborhoods and look at structures that we were going to save, look at structures that we were not going to save because they did not have defensible space, or the yards were in such conditions that I was not going to put a firefighter in there to save that home. I was going to go to the next house that was defensible. Again, firefighters' lives are at risk. I've had people comment, well, let it burn because I got insurance. If there's one thing that irritates me most is to hear that comment, because as firefighters, we do not know that. We're going to try to save that structure as much as we can. Mm-hmm. So again, be proactive, not reactive. And when you're told to evacuate, do not debate. So that's it.
Awesome. Brian?
I can't do much better than what Robert said. So everything he said. And then I think maybe one thing I might add is as we go forward and we do undertake some projects and you might see them on the landscape, be patient with us. I think one thing that maybe we haven't mentioned is that we have tools in our toolbox, but they might not work as we know it, as we have used them historically. And so to a degree, we might be inventing and developing the next active management strategies. And with that, there's going to be a learning curve. We'll see what works and what doesn't. But just know that all of us are passionate about this, and we want to make a difference. We want to affect change. And so that would just be my plea, maybe, is just to be patient with us, and we are actively trying to improve the situation, if you will.
Any final parting thoughts, Laura?
I just feel very grateful that we have this partnership with the state and the Forest Service. And I echo what everyone else said, firefighter safety, the consequences of a fire can be much broader than one might imagine. We have a lot to adapt to right now, and I know our community will come along with us, but I do appreciate what Brian said about being patient with that too, because we are learning as we go along.
So yeah, stay tuned with everybody here, and stay tuned to Save Our Canyons. We'll come up with ways. I was just thinking, and I saw a comment about this junior firefighter education program. But Save Our Canyons, we have our youth education, our Save Our Canyons kids who've gone out and we've toured water treatment plants. Maybe we should get out with you, Brian and Robert, and have you do some fire education with the youth, because we know that educating the youth will help educate the parents. And Bekee's and her Forest Service Rangers have also been just an incredible partner with that Save Our Canyons Kids program as well. So, well, stay tuned. I skipped my whole innovation section because the conversation was going so well, but I think that's a great point. There's a lot of innovations. So with that, I'm going to stop flapping my yap trap and get on with our evenings. But thank you all so much for everything you're doing, for managing the fires that are currently raging throughout the state of Utah, and Laura, for your constant and proactive management of our water resources up there in the Wasatch Mountains. And with that, I'll give everybody a good night. And thank you so much.
Night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Righty.
Bye.
Okay.